Hello, Alana. Mahalo for having me here today at your place.
Oh.
One thing that I'm always interested when I'm like wanting to learn more about people, what helps them be cool, right? And standing tall, being grounded.
Mhm.
And I remember coming across your book, Aloha Kitchen, for the first time, and now it's one of those things where we see a lot of familiar local recipes, something that we all grew up with, and
Right.
seeing how it kind of makes us feel a little more at home. But before we get into that, let's just go right into the food part. Because food becomes such a big part of our identity.
Absolutely.
It's the kind of way we bring our family together. It's kind of the thing that we show our love.
Mhm.
When we talk about that, what is the first kind of dish that you think about?
For me, I think it's mochiko,
Mm,
specifically my mom's mochiko chicken. It's just like a dish that's tied to special occasions.
yeah,
If you know anything about mochiko chicken, it requires frying. It also requires a marination time. So when I think of family and I think of like special events, it's always mochiko chicken.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that's one of the things about food, right? You see about how it takes time.
Yeah.
And sometimes the most like satisfying things is that you can sense that feeling of the work that goes into the food,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
when you feed it to people, like when you see the food that you cook and you see people enjoy that food, how does that make you feel?
I mean, it's something that never gets old.
Yeah,
When I cook a meal for someone who actually comes over, seeing them enjoy it, it's like they're feeling your love, right?
yeah,
Like you made this for them. And then it's like with a book, with recipes, getting emails or like Instagram DMs or whatever it is from people who I've never met, who have taken the recipes that I wrote and kind of woven them into their lives. Like
yeah,
there's nothing better,
yeah.
truly.
We both know that we've both spent time away from Hawaii,
Yeah.
and when you did Aloha Kitchen, you're away from Hawaii at that time, right? You're kind of in that
Yeah, we
process.
were living in LA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did that mean for you to be like working on this project, right? Doing your blog with
Yeah.
the food blogging and
Yeah.
working on creating this new idea and concept and being away from home,
Mhm.
and starting with as Aloha Kitchen.
Yeah.
What planted that part?
So for me, writing a book,
Yeah.
um, we should back up because I think if you're going to write a book, you have to believe 110, 120, 200% in it.
Yeah.
You have to believe that it has to exist. And so Aloha Kitchen was something that at the time didn't really exist. I wanted something that kind of took all the really wonderful local recipes that you get in like the 4-H like spiral bound books and
Mhm.
take those recipes and give them to everyone because like me, somebody who's from Hawaii, right? I missed the food so much
Yeah.
and I didn't have like one source where I could find all the recipes and like dishes I was craving. So
Mm.
I wanted to create that for myself but also for everyone else.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing too, because there's a lot of people from Hawaii who move away or have a lot of connections to Hawaii
Yeah.
who are always looking for that touch of home or that
Yeah.
taste of home, whether it's like native Hawaiian food or just the local foods.
Mhm.
And when you mentioned the spiral binders, it's like we all grew up, with the
Oh,
communities or like the school,
yes,
like, oh, this is like the school's top recipes from families, and
absolutely.
like those become like they're always in your cupboard
Yeah.
somewhere. And so we talk about this whole process of starting Aloha Kitchen, being away from home,
Mhm.
and then now you find yourself back on Maui.
Yeah.
You know, how has that shaped how you look at food even more? Because now you're back on the islands from being away from home, and you have this new sense of your surroundings. Right? It's different
Yeah. Yeah, so I think being away from home, I was looking for that taste of home.
now. Hmm.
Being at home, I kinda look at food now as, like, twofold. It's obviously the comforting dishes that I grew up with, but also trying to incorporate what's around
Oh,
me.
yeah. So you have Aloha Kitchen, and then now you're moving on to this new project that you're working on, which is called
Aloha Veggies.
Aloha Veggies. What planted the seed to go into that part of storytelling, right? Because you have these local favorites that you were really focused on while you were away from home, and now you're going a different kind of direction.
Yeah.
What kind of planted that seed for you?
So, when I came home, I obviously tried to immerse myself in what was going on here. And just in going out to restaurants and whatnot, there was like a universal theme, which I obviously knew existed because I wrote Aloha Kitchen. But it's the diet here is so meat centric.
Yes.
I thought like the flavors and the recipes that we have, like there's such a good building block for flavor to then impart maybe into vegetables. So I explored it. And I first kind of looked at like, well, what's growing here? And like, it's almost everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really was like, okay, can I take the flavors we know and love and apply them to vegetables, which, aren't necessarily well known in our diet, but totally could be.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of like, can I do this for our community? Because I hope that we would eat more vegetables, and this is a really easy way to start incorporating them.
Yeah. And the reason why I'm interested in this too, because for myself, I didn't grow up eating a lot of vegetables, to be
Right.
honest.
Same.
And I think, I think that's just a common thing when you
Yeah.
come to certain families, So I've always had this adverse feeling against vegetables, like, it's not that
Yeah.
flavorful or anything. So how do you approach those kind of people like myself who I
Yeah.
felt that way about vegetables?
Well,
Yeah.
let me start with my mom. I
Okay.
told her I was writing this book, Aloha Veggies, and her response was, I don't see that selling very well. And I'm like, Mom, no, we want this book. And
Yeah.
she's like, well, I don't think people want that though. And so writing the book, it was really cool to bring dishes over to her house and to say like, try this. I think you might like it. And sometimes she'd be like literally scrunch her nose up at me, but she'd give it a try. And I would get, some reactions that were like, oh, this is fine. But a lot of reactions like, oh, this is good.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like trying to package it in a way that is familiar.
Yeah.
That's the way I'm starting to kind of try to find the people who say like, I don't like vegetables. And it's like, if you only steam your broccoli, like it's not going to taste
That's
that
pretty
great.
much all I did.
Yeah.
Was just steam my broccoli.
Right. And so like, I hear that for sure. But I also think that we can kind of package it in a more approachable way.
Yeah. That goes back to what you mentioned before, coming back to Maui and seeing all the produce that are out here and seeing all the farmers and all the work that goes into it. How much has that connection of being back home, going out to the community, seeing the local ingredients, seeing the farmers, has that helped you even more so of being like, this is a book that needs to be written and shared, just to have people a little more curious about bringing more vegetables into your life?
Well, I think, so writing the book, I actually was so lucky to connect with a bunch of local farms.
Yeah.
So I flew over to Oahu and I met with Sumida Farm, which I don't know if you're familiar with them, but their watercress, like I literally call it Sumida Farm watercress. Like that's what watercress is. They're so synonymous with watercress. And so seeing how much they love what they're growing and how connected they feel to their community, and they don't sell it anywhere but Hawaii.
Oh, wow.
And it's because they want to feed the community. And so like meeting farmers like that who, they're a legacy farm. They've been around, I think this is, I'm not sure. I think it's like third, fourth, fifth. It's a lot of generations. They've been like tending the land this whole time, and they really look at themselves as like stewards. So I went to that farm and I was like, oh, we need more watercress in this book. So I started to weave it in, right? And so it's like, in going to the farms, I started to be like, wow, we need to add this vegetable. And so it became like bigger and bigger in terms of what I was looking at as like the vegetables I was focusing on.
Yeah, I think that's what makes Hawaii so special, right? Is that we have all this ingredients and great produce here for us, but it's not being spoken about very much.
Right.
It's kind of hidden. People talk about it. You go to the farmers markets and so forth, but it's not in that mainstream area where people are really like looking out for them.
Well, and you need to kind of look at it as like, there's a lot of work that goes into growing like that one broccoli that you steamed that you didn't really love. I think if we were to connect with our local farmers, we would, one, you get better produce that way, right? Because it's hyper fresh. Two, we need to be supporting the farmers, because it's like, if we don't, then we will continue to bring in produce from the mainland
Yeah.
where we want to grow the farms. We want to grow what we're producing.
Mhm.
And so I don't know. For me, it's just like the more we know, what's growing, the more we know what goes into it, the more excited I think
Yeah.
we're all going to be to like eat more veggies.
Yeah. Out of all the recipes that you've been working on, what's one that kind of stands out to you the most?
Okay, so there's Lala, which
Yeah.
I'm sure you love,
Yeah.
but if you take vegetables and you put them into like your bundle
Mhm.
and you add like you can do just like the salt and that's
Yeah.
great, but you can add like a little more flavor. Like I have kind of like a riff on like a shoyu or like a teriyaki.
Okay.
Take that and you put it on really hearty vegetables that can cook a long time. I swear to you, you're gonna like be
Yeah.
blown away.
But I think that's the amazing thing, right? Is like those, and kind of leads me to my next question, because you have all these like recipes that are very close to families and like
Yeah.
or like have been going through a long time, and now you're kind of trying to feel like, oh, maybe try it this way,
Yeah.
this as a more of a healthier, health conscious kind of a process.
Hmm.
How do you balance that, right? Like keeping that to those traditional
Yeah.
recipes while also bringing in a new perspective.
Yeah. It's something I thought a lot about when I was writing the
Mhm.
book. And I think if you know where something comes from, you tell the story, right? So every recipe, I make sure to say, like, this comes from this recipe. So that's one part, right? Then you look at the ingredient story
Yeah.
and you make sure that you're staying true to the ingredient story as well, where, I'm talking about like the flavors that go into it.
Yeah.
And so for like shoyu chicken, for instance, you're taking like the aromatics and whatnot, and then you're applying them to vegetables. So I think it's a lot of intention, knowing where the dish comes from,
Mhm.
honoring the ingredients, and then, trying to then bring it into a different not the future per se,
Yeah.
but just like into a different realm. I think that all food cultures are evolving, constantly
Mhm.
evolving. And I think that the way that you honor them is simply telling their story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, great. So at the Coop Project, we talk a lot about being more grounded and being more present, because to stand tall, that's what you need to be doing. Um, how does cooking help you with that? Is there a process, or is there um, like how does that relate to you?
I mean, I think that's everything in
Yeah.
cooking, right? You have to be present
Yeah.
when you're cooking. And it's just I think it's in every aspect. So
Mhm.
it's sourcing your ingredients, you stay grounded in where you're sourcing them. Like for me, I'm always looking at what are the local farmers that I could be, going to, can I grow it myself?
Mhm.
These types of things. And then it's like when you're doing kind of like when you're starting a recipe, right? You have to read it through.
Right.
Then I recommend you read it through again. And so, I mean, I think cooking literally is grounding you.
Yeah. You know, I have to. I think my wife's gonna kill me for this one, because that's one of the things I always try to remind her is make sure you read the whole
Yeah.
recipe, because there's been times where we've done a recipe and I'll be like, "Okay, is that it?" And she's like, "Oh no, there's a whole other page." I'll be like, "Wait, what
Yeah.
time is dinner supposed to be at?"
Right.
She's
Yeah.
like, "Oh well, it'll be a late dinner tonight."
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where like being more mindful of like going through the whole thing and like
Absolutely.
having a the vision of what's gonna come to the end. But I think that's such an important thing. And when it comes to cooking, there's so many different levels of how people approach cooking, right?
Hmm.
But I also feel like, as you mentioned, there's a lot of lessons that
Yeah.
come with cooking, and and creating something that you're going to be feeding others,
Yeah.
whether it be family, friends, or just community. What kind of lessons has cooking taught you?
Yeah. I mean, everything really. It's like humility. Um, you know, you can have your best intentions. You can get all the ingredients right. You can read the recipe a couple of
Yeah.
times and you'll walk away for 5 minutes because your dog's barking at the mailman. You come back and you burnt something.
Yeah.
And it's just like being like, "Okay, it happens. Like how can I fix this?
Yeah.
Can I salvage it? Do I have to start over?" So that's like a really easy lesson just there. And then I mean there are all these other little lessons, right? Like patience.
Mhm.
Lots of recipes take time. Some are really simple. You don't need to be flashy to
Yeah.
like make a really good dish. I really think that cooking goes hand in hand with life, and it probably makes a ton of sense, right? Because like we're literally cooking to nourish our
Mhm.
bodies
Yeah.
and to live.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that's why it goes a bit back being more mindful of, we always talk about like being more aware of what you put into your body,
Mhm.
and this is where that your new project of Aloha Veggies really comes in, because as you mentioned, you are looking to resources that are around you,
Mhm.
and being more mindful of the produce, being more mindful of the community that you're within. I think
Mhm.
that's a good way to just kind of model that sort of, like we talk about kuleana responsibility
Mhm.
of where you are within the community,
Yeah.
and how can you better, work within that where you're at to have more of a sustainable,
Mhm.
living and eating more sustainably. It's because
Mhm.
then it takes care of the environment a little bit more,
Absolutely.
and also supports the farmers that we need to take better care of,
Yeah.
right? So how has that been even more so making you feel like this is something, while it may be, as you mentioned, daunting a little bit,
Yeah.
it's also kind of like a calm for you, right?
Yeah. I mean, I hope that with anything I do,
Mhm.
I'm making a positive impact in people's lives. And this particular project, it means so much to me because it's, for me, Aloha Kitchen, the first book, it was like, I wanted to write this book for me. I
Mhm.
wanted to write this book for everyone else. But I also felt an immense sense of pressure to
Yeah.
get the recipes right, to make sure that everyone felt represented. And in this book, Aloha Veggies, I mean, it is also, there's pressure. Like, I want to get the recipes right in the sense that I want to get the message out that, like, we can make vegetables taste so good.
Mhm.
They actually don't need a lot of help because so many of them taste wonderful on
Yeah.
their own. And if we learn how to cook them properly, like, sky's the limit.
Yeah. And I think that's where it goes into like this whole creative process, right? Because you worked on Aloha Kitchen was your first book. I enjoyed a lot of recipes from it,
Yay.
and but it comes to this new project and this whole process of creating a book
Yeah.
and um, having to cook all the food and the ingredients and the recipes. And can you just explain like how do you go about that whole concept of the whole process of
Yeah.
thinking about it, creating,
Mhm.
testing, like what does that even look like? And then
Yeah.
making it into a book.
Yeah. So, I mean, with this book, like a lot of them are brand new recipes,
Yeah.
right? Like they lived in my mind. And so I would start out by saying, like, okay, what's the base recipe look like,
Okay.
right? And so you take all the ingredients that are in the base recipe that can be applied to a vegetable. And so I would just write it out.
Okay.
Just write it out and be like, this is what I think it could be. And then you try it. You test it out and you're like, oh, I have to tweak this.
Yeah.
Or like, sometimes I'd do a few rounds and I'd be like, this can't live in the book. It's too fussy, or like it just didn't line up to what I had envisioned. And so it's a constant just kind of like checking and seeing where
Yeah.
you're at. Like, yes, this works. This is wonderful, or like, ooh, yeah, back to the drawing board. So I think, yeah, it's just a constant just start, try, fail, succeed, and
Mhm.
then start again.
And that goes back to the whole life lesson, right? Is that and I'm sure it gets pretty frustrating at times. As a book writer and recipe books, and then you have your editors, you have
Yeah.
all this whole like, other team that you have to be working with too, right? There's little sense of pressure, or that comes on top of you at some point because there's deadlines.
Yeah.
How do you handle that? Because I think a lot of people they only see the end product.
Yeah.
They don't see like just like the farmers, right?
Yeah.
They only see the end product. They don't see all the work and the
Mm-hmm.
time and the
Yeah.
effort that goes into producing something physical. So how do you deal with those sorts of pressures?
Yeah. So for a book, you get
Yeah.
about a year to
Okay.
write your manuscript. And the manuscript is literally like all the recipes plus the head notes, which are like above the recipes, and then the introduction. And if there's like a pantry section, all those little bits, 1 year.
Oh wow.
Um, and you look at that on your calendar
Yeah.
and you tell yourself, I'm going to hit that deadline. But you also give yourself enough grace to be like, if I don't, I can ask.
Yeah.
And so for me, this second time around, was like, I'm not going to hit this deadline. So I asked for like a little more time. And it was so important and so crucial. So I think it's just like setting realistic expectations. Yeah.
One thing, because even for myself, like when it comes to the whole creative process, expectations and so forth, it's really about, again, going back to being very intentional what you're putting out there, because you do want to put something that you're proud of. You don't want to rush it, and if you don't feel right about it, then it's just not time. And I think that takes a lot of like humility, and patience and grace for yourself, rather than beating yourself up, being like, oh my gosh, because then that affects the work that you're putting out even more so. When we talk about Aloha Veggies, it's one of those things where I'm always interested in how can we change that perspective. We're going back to in the beginning, right? We're talking about how a lot of people focus more on meats.
Yeah.
Like, everything's about meats and like how do you make it more savory and so forth. And but what have you done in order to put vegetables at the forefront of this book?
Yeah.
For people to be like, well, because when they see Aloha Veggies, they're gonna just think about whatever vegetable they don't like. They're gonna be like, oh, I can't do that. But how have you made sure that you've given them options?
Oh, this is something that I'm excited about.
Okay.
Like, I'm really excited to talk about it because we did a few things.
Okay.
So one part is just giving you a simple formula. So kind of looking at like what a plate lunch looks like, right? So you've got a main, it's typically like a protein, right? Then you've got a starch. It's usually like steamed white rice. And then sometimes you have like a mac salad. Sometimes you have a green salad, right? But that
the green salad is usually like the cabbage underneath.
Yes, 100%. But there's always something, right? So that simple formula of like a main, a side, and a starch. You take that and you apply that to vegetables, right? Because for me, when I started to want to incorporate vegetables into my life, I oftentimes felt very hungry at the end of the meal. And it's because I didn't know how to balance it to make sure I was satiated. And so by taking that formula, number one, something very familiar, right? Plate lunch, you apply it to vegetables. That kind of takes the guesswork out. So it makes it really easy for you to start somewhere, right? Then you take the main, say it's shoyu kabocha, which I love. I didn't just give you one shoyu dish, I gave you 4.
Oh, wow.
So there are 4 different ways that you can apply 4 different vegetables using that kind of shoyu flavor. So you'll find something, I hope, that you like in those 4.
Okay.
And I applied that to every single thing. So every single, I call them subchapters. Every single subchapter has 4 variations, therefore giving you like infinite options.
That's like,
right?
because it's one thing that's so different from what you find in other books.
Yeah.
Because other books is like, this is the recipe, you follow it. But now you're giving like, here, this is like the kabocha.
Yeah, you like shoyu chicken?
Okay, well,
you might like this.
This, or if it doesn't work for you, this.
Right.
And I think that just makes people feel a little bit more, it's a little more inviting and welcoming.
Yeah.
Rather than feeling a little more intimidating.
That's my hope.
Because I feel like whenever I pick up, again, like a vegetarian book or a vegetable forward book, or plant-based, it can be a little bit intimidating. Like, and I feel the same way. Like, I've done plant-based before, and I was kind of skeptical, but again, you learn about the different foods that help you feel more satiated.
Right.
Because in the beginning I was just like, I'm starving, and that was when I was exercising and everything. I was like, I need something that fills me up or can last me longer. But then you become more just more aware of the foods that you're consuming, and learning more about the produce, and learning more about how your body reacts to certain foods.
Absolutely.
So I think the fact that you are able to give options within one recipe, like you said, like instead of this one recipe, you're actually getting 4.
Yeah.
And people have that flexibility to be like, well, I'm not a big fan of this vegetable, but I know this. This feels familiar, so maybe I'll try it out.
Yeah.
So I think that also gives the readers a little bit more of like, this go on this journey.
Yeah, it's like I want to give the ownership away, right? Like, I don't own these, you own these now. Like, how do you want to incorporate them into your life? Like, go for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that I really appreciate how this direction you're going, because it's really like you're just giving them the tools,
Yeah.
and you're saying like, here's the tools to try it out, and then kind of walking them through that journey. Like, you
Hmm.
don't want, this doesn't work out, try this.
Right.
That doesn't work out, try that. Like, because you can always go back to chicken.
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
but at some point, it's good to also be like, let's try this,
For
because I
sure.
think every family talks about how they need to incorporate more vegetables.
Hmm.
Whether they're looking at, there's health conscious, or they have kids and be like, my kids don't eat vegetables. Like, how can I make vegetables more appealing to them?
Right.
This is a great way to do that.
I mean, I'm really hoping.
Because I mean, for myself, my kids have a hard time eating vegetables, but when you give them something that's tastes familiar,
Right.
even though it's not exactly what they're expecting, they're like, oh, this is actually not that
Right.
what I was thinking.
Or like just plant-based in general, right?
Yeah.
So like tofu even, it can be pretty bland,
Yeah.
but there are so many easy hacks to making it flavorful.
Yeah.
And I'm sharing them all in the book.
Let's think about, like, if you take one of your favorite dishes from Aloha Veggies, and we sit down Aloha Ohana style,
Yeah.
and we sing it with a whole bunch of people from readers across the world, and they're enjoying a dish. What's one thing that you want them to feel?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Let's see. I want them to feel like to have a sense of place, number one. So I want them to know where their food's coming from. And I mean in terms of like where that dish came from, right? And so like all the dishes here in Aloha Veggies, they originated more or less here in Hawaii, right? Whether it's like a native Hawaiian dish or like something that, came from just living here and integrating into the culture, right? And like going with like, okay, well, I have the access to these ingredients.
Yeah.
Like, what can I do with that? So like I hope that it grounds them in their sense of place. I hope that they realize that like veggies are delicious. Like they are so good. And like I hope that they can see that it's just like it's a new chapter of cooking in like local Hawaii food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this direction is something that is needed within Hawaii's culture, um, just across the local style cooking and everything, because it is something that everyone's always conscious about eating more vegetables, or just are a little, like, as I mentioned, intimidated about how to do that. They just think
Sure.
salads.
Oh
It's
yeah.
always got to eat salads, more salads, more
Yeah.
salads. But you're taking this approach. It's like, no, we can still have our same local favorite, the flavors that we grew up with and we learned
Right.
to love, by implementing more vegetables.
Yes. Yes. And it's not saying like don't eat meat.
Yeah.
I eat meat.
Yeah.
I grew up in Hawaii. I love all the dishes that are in Aloha Kitchen. I love all the dishes that are in Aloha Veggies.
Mhm.
I'm just saying, like, if you want to incorporate more vegetables, this is like a good starting point.
No, that's awesome. And again, going back to giving the tools, and hopefully people take those tools and live a healthier, more vegetable filled life.
Yeah.
And this go back to bring up to my last question. Because at the Cool Project, our main focus is always just to stand tall and feel grounded. How does working on all this stuff that you've been doing with Aloha Kitchen and talking to all these people about the work that you've been doing with Aloha Veggies now, um, how does that sound to you? Like, what does that mean to you, being able to live cool, be cool, stand a bit
Yeah.
taller?
I mean, gosh. It's kind of everything, right?
Mhm.
It's like I hope that we all learn to ground in everyday activities. And so for me, being in the kitchen is so fundamental. I'm in the kitchen I'm in the kitchen every day.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. I'm in the kitchen like almost every meal. And so I'm hoping that people learn to be proud of themselves for doing the simple things,
Yeah.
right? For being in the kitchen, for feeding their families, for nourishing themselves. I think we can all stand tall and be proud and feel grounded in the simple everyday activities.
Oh, awesome. And I think that's something that, as you mentioned, gets overlooked, is those simple things,
Mhm.
right? Being proud of the simple things that you do throughout your day. For me, I always talk about, hey, you made it.
Yeah.
You know, like like you're here,
Yeah.
you're in the kitchen or wherever you're at, you're here, you
Yeah.
know, and I think that's a strong way to look at things, right? Like I'm here, I'm in the kitchen, let's make the best of it. My last final question, I swear, is that now that you have this Aloha Veggies coming out, like can you share a little bit more about like when do we expect it to happen and how can we learn more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so it comes out April 28th,
Nice.
2026.
Yeah.
You can pretty much order it from wherever you would get like a book. So whether that's like, obviously, I hope it's your local bookseller. But if it's not and it's like Amazon, Amazon's great. You can get it from Barnes and Noble.
And then, other than that, if people want to learn more about your process or see your process going along, how can they follow you or
Yeah,
yeah.
great. I'd love that. I'm on Instagram, my name, which is Alana Kysar, Kysar. And I will be sharing more behind the scenes as we get closer.
Solid. Alana, again, mahalo for having me in your home to sit down and just take time of your day, out of your kitchen, pulling you within your kitchen to just talk stories and learn more about the project that has um, right now has inspired me
Yay.
to have a different perspective and also look at the way that Cool Project is also working within the community, within our local farmers and so forth. And so I really just want to say mahalo for that. So,
Thank you
yeah,
so
I'm having a
much.
great time.
I
Uh,
really had so much fun.
yeah, we will. Thank you.